Hey, welcome. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do the classic ball bounce exercise that is super helpful, both digitally and traditionally alike. To get started, you'll want to set up a basic scene. It can have a plane and a ball, or you can have a separate object. If you have something like a barrel or a disc or a wheel, something that you can still do this kind of same bouncy animation. It's lots of fun. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing is you're going to need two windows, and you can go up to window and then animation. Occasionally Unity moves it around, but there's two animation windows, the animation and the animator. So the animator is the animator controller, and then the animation window is where we're going to do our keyframing at. The animator window, this is what has our states. So you can have multiple animations. So we like have an idle, a pulse, and we could do a ball bounce and whatever else that we might have. You would have these different states in here, just like a character would have a run, walk, jump, crouch, slide, all that. So later on, I'm going to talk about why and when you would want to use the state machine and these transitions, because you don't always want to do that. It's only for specific things, and a lot of people don't know that, and they'll have a mess inside this animator where it's just crazy town, and there's different ways to manage that, and there's specific reasons why you might not want to also have all these transitions when you can call the animations automatically through code. So next up, the animation window, our keyframes. So if you're doing a whole new object, you'll just select your object. I called it wheel object or OBJ. And because I've never animated it before, it'll automatically show right here that we need to create an animation. And when we do that, it's going to have us create a file for that. This file is literally going to be like the animation, kind of like a video clip for what we're animating. So in this case, it would be wheel bounce, right? And this wheel bounce, when I save it on my wheel, it's gonna put an animator on it, and you'll see it creates a controller called wheel object. And if I went to my project and assets and anim, you'll see I get the wheel object dot controller. When I double click this, that brings up the states. So you can see right now, I have when we enter animation, or when we enter play, when it starts, it's going to automatically enter and play the wheel bounce. That's the default. It's in orange. So now if you are working on the ball, because even with the wheel, I'm going to show you a trick as well again, but with the ball, we could just animate this ball as well, and I'll show you kind of both with the tips. But I'm going to do the same general animation of bouncing. So we'll go to our animation tab, and for this ball, I've already got two animations. So since I already have that, I'm going to create new clip, and then I'll name this ball underscore bounce. Now, for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to animate this ball instead of the wheel for right now, but you would follow the same procedure if you were doing some other object like the wheel. The next thing that we want to do is set up the timeline, right? The first thing is I always like to go to the three dots for the timeline, and I like to work in seconds. It'll still show you the frames, but I like to be in seconds. And then you also want to check this box for show sample rate. So when you check this box, it'll then show you the default is going to be 60, which is great if we were doing like realistic and trying to get really smooth animation. But let's just say we're wanting to do like some standard movie film animation, and that the default is kind of 24, and that'd be great. And for a 2D game, we could do even 12, right, frames. That gets into a deeper topic, going back to Disney and frame by frame animation and other things, but we'll keep it simple. We're going to do 24 frames. So once we click enter, it updates, and you can see on our timeline, it goes from 0, 0. So you get 1 frame, 2 frame, 3 frame, 4 frame. So this 4 here also shows right here. So we're on frame 4. Now, once we get from 22 to 23 and then 24, you'll notice it says 24 here, but on the timeline it says 1, 0, 0. This is because it is 1 second and 0 frames, which is the 24th frame. Now what we can do is just bring our mouse down to the timeline and use our scrolly to kind of zoom out just so we can get to like, say about 110 right here, okay? Now what we want to do, we're going to start off with our ball up in the air. But how far up in the air? So I'm going to switch the grid on, and I currently am going to switch the grid from the Y to the Z here so we can see it. So my ball was kind of almost about 1 frame, you know, so maybe I just want to come up just a little bit more. I could always back my camera off too, but maybe just a little bit higher, something like that. I don't know. So we're going to start with our ball here and at frame 0. So we're going to go ahead and click record. And before we actually change any movement or scale, I'm going to do add property first, go to transform, and do the position. So I can just click the plus note. Now, a good thing to note too is you can also have child objects that you animate as well. And you would just go to add property and find the child object and then whatever you're wanting to animate for that child object. That's one way of doing it. But anyway, so now that we got this, we got our first frame is recorded for the position. The X, Y, and Z are keyframed up here, and at the end, at 24 frames is keyframed. Now I'm going to move this over to 1 second and the 10 frame mark. So that way our ball has the starting and ending position, and then roughly about right here in the middle, say, we're going to then just grab the Y axis. So you can press W on your keyboard or use the tool over here for the move tool, but W is the shortcut. And then we'll grab just the green axis, that's the Y going up and down, and we'll just bring it back down. And it really doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to have to adjust this later anyway. And one of the things you could do, although on my scene it's kind of hard with the bricks, but you can go into 2D mode so you can kind of see where it's at. Pressing W, you know, you can actually see. So that's one way. Sometimes I like doing the 2D mode as well. But there we go. So now we can turn off record and click play. So we can see our ball moving up and down. And that's great. And you can see it looks a little bit weird. And if you watch it closely, let's turn off the grid, you can see that it's kind of easing up and down. It kind of seems like it's faster in the middle, right? Just slightly. And the reason for that is when we created the keyframes, it's easing in and out. And the only really way to change that is that we have to refine the animation using the curves editor, which is one of the awesome tools where we can manipulate and change how it animates from one keyframe to the next. So to do that, we're going to go to the curves window here. Woo! And you can see it is gone crazy. We can drag this up. You could zoom out, yes, different ways. But what we can do is just with our mouse inside of the timeline here, just press F. And there we go, we can see it. Now, depending on how big your monitor is, you may have to use some shortcut keys, use your scrolly mouse, and kind of figure out to get it framed right. But nonetheless, now you can see here. So here it is, the position of the Y, which is the green. You can see it's the green line too. You can see it went from a little bit above 0 to the ball went up in the air. And you can see it's slowly coming down. Then it's kind of looks like it speeds up. This is more like the average speed. And then as it comes down, it starts to slow down when it hits the ground. Now, if we want this to not ease out from this keyframe, you can see when I click it, there's a handle that comes out, but we don't want to change that really per se. But one of the things that we can do is we could right click, and this is a right tangent because the handle's coming off to the right, and we could tell it to be linear. So now when we do that, you'll see it changes, but it's just this first part. What it is it's steadily at the same rate the ball goes down until it gets to here, right? And then it starts to smooth, or what we call easing, right? It eases into this keyframe. So now we could select this one and do right click, and we could do the left tangent and do linear. So you can kind of see that the first part, it kind of like comes down at a steady rate, but then it eases out and into the next one. And if I zoom out, you can see it just repeats this over and over again. So we need to fix that because we want it to look more natural, more organic, and we want to have this impact to have a specific feel to it. So what we can do, we're going to go ahead and change this tangent over here back to what it was. We could either do Control Z, or we could select it and change the tangent back to free. But once we do that, I just did Control Z and went back. Now I'm going to select the middle tangent here. And the reason why I'm leaving the beginning and the end is because when a ball is in the air, it feels like it's kind of like at its climax and it's changing with the weight and momentum and gravity. It's going up, but the force is falling off, so it starts to then fall back down slowly, and then it speeds up. And then we want this impact. So for the impact, we don't want it easing in or easing out. So we're going to right click on it and do both tangents. So the left and the right side are the tangents of the keyframe. And we'll select free. We could also, I'm curious if we do both tangents linear, we make it linear first and then do free. It keeps that linear mark, and we could see what that looks like. Boing, 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 boing. Feels like it, maybe the ball should go higher or something so it's going faster. Or I could also just in the project, or I'm sorry, the animation, go back to the dope sheet and just bring it down. Maybe select all of these keyframes and just move them to 12. Let's see, and move all of these to 24 and just see. So it's a little bit faster. Okay. So there we got the ball position. So now what we want to do is add some squash and stretch. And one term I didn't cover is when you are moving across the timeline like this with just your mouse, we call that scrubbing, right? It's referred to as scrubbing the timeline. You can also select a keyframe and Control C, move forward and paste it. So it's like the ball stays there and then goes down. And then you can simply select them and delete them too. right? You could do this drop down arrow, and this shows you, even though it keyframed the X each time, it was just keyframing 0. The only thing that was actually changing is the Y position went from here to here. So the Y is the only thing that actually changed, even though it created keyframes for each of them. So let's go ahead and we'll add a property for scale. And it's nice, it already creates the keyframes for us for the beginning and the end, so the ball is the right size. And then here, when it squashes, we can switch to our scale tool, which the shortcut is R for rail. We're going to rail it to a different size, or scale it, rail it, the R for scale tool. And you can see here that if I'm going to squash it, it's going to be squashed on the Y, right? So maybe I'll do, right, 0.8. So it would make sense if it's squashing on the Y 0.8, maybe on the X, it's actually 1.2. Whoop, keyboard's wigging out there. So that 0.2 moved to the other side. So we're sort of keeping that same form as it's deforming, though, from hitting the ground. So it's like the mass is coming out to the sides. So it just logically makes sense. The easiest way to kind of practice and see that is to watch it in real life, so you can see it in action and see that's what it kind of looks like to our eyes. Or especially if you did a more of a jelly type ball, right, instead of just like a basketball. Basketball, you're not going to see that as much. But nonetheless, okay, so now we got our scale. And so right here in the middle, when we did those numbers, right, nothing happened. But if we type in scale, record, then we can go to the scale and we can change that to 0.8, right? And then 1.2 on the X. And it creates those keyframes. Now the only problem is now you can see it's transitioning from a ball to a bean, was what it looks like. So what I can do, since I should have done this in the first place, but I can actually copy these keyframes here, and the frame before paste them, and the frame after paste it. So it's sort of like comes down, bounces, and goes back up. Boing, boing. Helps maybe if I deselect it. Boing, 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 boing. Very nice. So we can turn off record for a second. So now, though, we see that the squashy stretchiness here, it's not actually touching the floor. So I can actually turn record back on and fix the position. So I'll press W, select the ball, move it down to where it's hitting the ground. That looks like pretty good. So now it's actually hitting the ground. There we go. So now there's a couple other things that we could do to really make this look nice. So, and that is, we want to leave our beginning keyframes the same and our end keyframes the same. But the one thing that we could do is try to change the before and after. But that means we're also going to have to copy and paste these keyframes one before that. So we're going to put this same keyframe right here and the same keyframe right here. So it's not changing the position, it's just the scale. So that way, we could take, and maybe even, actually, maybe move these back in this way. There we go. So there's a little bit of space. So all I did was from 0 frames to 8 frames, it stays the same scale. But then on frame 11 here, right before it squashes, I want to emphasize some speed. So in this case, right, I'm going to squash it the opposite way, so 0.8 on the X. Now, in order for this to really work though, we need to click record, and then on the X I can do 0.8, bam, and I could leave the Y 1, will, just so it doesn't stretch it to where it's touching the ground, and then I have to move the positions as well. So I could kind of cheat a little bit, but this gives it that illusion of speed that it's coming downwards. So, and then I can still move the keyframes, because maybe in the middle of the air, so maybe I want it to go from, okay, the ball is a regular ball, but then as it comes down, it starts to change form. So the first 3 seconds, then it starts to squash downward or stretch downward, and then smack, and then it comes back up. And then maybe when it comes back up, I'll just go ahead and turn off record, delete these scale keyframes. I'll copy these blue ones here, Control C, and then Control V to paste them here. So now we get that, it's coming down, it smacks the ground, and then it goes back, going upwards. Right, and then this, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna move these more towards the end. So it's stretching slowly up into its original form. Woo! Okay, now let's play that. Boing, 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 boing. And of course, there's still a few more things that we could do, but we're gonna leave it right there. That's a good amount depending on where you're at animation-wise, but to get you started and using that for other things. And I could do the same thing for the wheel as well. Just remember, if you're doing this for another object, if I animate the position, the scale, and the rotation, then this object I can no longer move, rotate, or scale it. But what I can do is if I'm going to animate the wheel object, I'd create an empty, maybe call it wheel parent, and might kind of put it where the wheel is starting at maybe. And then I'm going to take the object and parent it to the wheel parent. So I would animate the wheel object, but then the parent I can move wherever I want it to, and it's good to go. So just like this ball parent, I can click play, and the ball's going to animate right here. Oh, I must have broke something. But I can grab the ball and move it to the side. Oh, it's because the default animation is the idle and the pulse. So I'm going to select the ball bounce and right click and set that as default state. Go back to my scene view and unpause it. So now you can see lighting's a little weird there, but it is squashing and stretching. And I can pause it at any point in time and move it over, unpause it, and it's still bouncing the same no matter where I move it at. So I could move it way over here and it's still gonna bounce. I noticed that it was still feeling a little weird when it bounces. It almost feels like it's slowing down when it hits the ground. It wasn't making the impact that I thought it would. And then I realized if you look at the middle keyframe, it's kind of got a slight dip curve. It's really very hard to see. But what we can do is just grab these tangent handles and actually move them up more So we get this kind of more dip, and that's going to make more of an impact. Yeah. Now that looks nice. It's like blat, blat, splat, boom, boom, conk, boop. Whatever noise you want to insert there, but I like it. I like it. I hope you like it too. So awesome. Great job. Look forward to sharing some more tips and tricks and tools to put in your tool bag. And hopefully I'll see you on the next video.